I have two scriptures this morning, one from the Old Testament, the 133rd Psalm. I actually taught you guys to sing the first verse of this once upon a time. You remember? Psalm 133. How good and pleasant it is when kindred live together in unity. It's like the precious oil on the head running down upon the beard of Aaron, running down over the collar of his robes. It's like the dew of Hermon, which falls on the mountains of Zion. For there the Lord ordained his blessing, life forevermore. And a reading also from the New Testament, from the Acts of the Apostles in the 2nd chapter, verses 44 through 47. This is right at the beginning of the church, right after Pentecost, when the first 2,000 or 3,000 converts are making up the first Christian church ever, and they're living together in Jerusalem. And all who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all, as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. This is the word of the Lord. So, this is a two-part sermon. Next week is also going to be on the common good. That's the title for the sermon. But in this part, I'm going to deal with the idea of the common good in the church. Next week I'm going to talk about the idea of the common good as something that we can use to understand the relationship of the church to the rest of our culture and to participation in that culture. Psalms 133:1 points to the question of unity in the church. And we need to understand that unity doesn't mean thinking the same thing or having the same mind. It doesn't mean no disagreements. It means that we're committed to one another even when we disagree. And the common good, the idea of that which is good that all of us share, is a way to think about this that helps us cope with remaining unified, with continuing to practice our unity with one another, even when we disagree. Because most often, if we have that unity, if we have that commitment, our disagreements will be about what the common good is. Do we understand what the right thing to do is that will be of the best good for all of us together? And that's a disagreement that actually reflects our unity, because we're trying together to find the same thing, even if we've got some disagreement about what particular form it's going to take just right now. This commitment to one another is the critical ingredient that holds the church together. I also serve as stated clerk of the Presbyterian of New Brunswick, and I know of all kinds of situations where churches have lost that unity in the midst of disagreements. I know of 3 different churches that had almost the same pattern. They were small country churches for 100 years or more. And then the time came when those farms were being bought up and turned into suburban developments and filled up with houses. And the old country church now had to think about what's going on, because the children and grandchildren of the farmers grow up and they don't farm. And they take jobs in other cities, in other states. So the congregation is slowly shrinking. Slowly, but also inevitably. And all of these churches, all 3 of the ones I'm thinking of, took time to do a self-study and say, okay, who are we, who have we been, and also, most importantly, what is our new community? What is our new neighborhood? Who are these people who are moving in around us? And they took time to develop what's called in church preparation, a redevelopment plan. What do we have to do to stay rooted in our past, but nonetheless do something new and different that will minister to the people who live around us now? And after working on a redevelopment plan in all three of these cases, the churches were divided. There was a disagreement. They were divided about half and half, close to half and half, with some of the people wanting to say, okay, we looked at it, we thought about it, but what we want is to stay the way we've always been. And others of them said, no, we got to change. We have to change. We have to serve the people who are moving in. And that will be different because we're an aging congregation now, but all the new families moving into these new suburbs are younger families with children. And in all of these cases, the disagreement broke the unity. No one could find a way to say, hey, what is the good that's common to us? What good do we share? What good can we share with Christians who will be moving into this community? They couldn't find a way to stay committed to one another in the midst of their disagreement. And at one of the churches, the old folks left and said, no, I'm going to go find another traditional church somewhere. And at one of the churches, all the young families with children left and left the old congregation to just shrink. And at the other church, the disagreement was so severe that both groups left. And the church was left behind with a membership of about 12. And the Presbyterian had to close it shortly thereafter. Mere disagreement shouldn't break our unity, but it often does, because people don't remember to look for what the good is that we share, and don't remember to stay committed to one another. I had a different church that had to make a difficult decision about what to do with their building. They were living and worshiping in the building that was just their fellowship hall, because the classic old church building was in great difficulties. It was a 150-year-old building, and it would have needed almost $1 million worth of repairs and restructuring. And approximately half of the congregation said, that's our building. That's the spiritual heart of this congregation. We've got to take care of it. And the other half said, no, it's not. It's just a building. And if we spend $1 million on the building, where will be the money for ministry? What about how we're involved in the community around us? And this disagreement got to be totally severe. I had people from both groups come to me and say, how can we get those other people out of the church? Get them to go away and join some other congregation. Can we delete them from the membership rolls? That was one group saying, can we delete them from the membership rolls? The other group was saying, hey, can we get rid of this pastor? Then all the people on that side will go with them. Their unity was totally broken. It was totally broken. That church went through a really serious breakout. First and foremost, among the common goods that we share is God Himself, who is good to us and for us and among us, regardless of what our individual goods might be, and who there is no less for me if there's more for you. First and foremost, the good that is common to us all is Jesus Christ. Now, Jesus gave sacrificially, gave up His own good in order that we might be saved, in order that we might have a good from Him that we could not have had otherwise. And sometimes we too are expected to give sacrificially, but most of the time we're not expected to give in such a way that we have no good left for ourselves and the other party gets it all. We're expected to do what the church did at the time of the apostles and find a way to share what's common to us. Now, I would like to dispose of a couple of distractions from the passage in Acts, where they had all things in common and people sold what they had and distributed it to everyone. I've heard that passage preached as supporting socialism. And actually, it's not unreasonable. You could read that passage that way. You'd have to read it without reading a lot of other passages. The only church in the New Testament we see doing that total thing of everybody selling what they had and sharing it all is this church in Jerusalem. And this church was in special circumstances because this church was formed from among the people who came to Jerusalem for the Passover. And many of them had come from far away because the Jews looked to do that. The saying among the Jews is next year in Jerusalem, meaning next year at the Passover I'm going to go to Jerusalem to celebrate it. And in those days lots of people did. It tells us that that was why when the Holy Spirit came to the apostles, that's why they spoke in all those different tongues. So that all the Jews would come from all the different countries around would be able to understand them. And when those people heard the word and believed in their hearts and turned to God in Christ, they stayed in Jerusalem to be that first church, because this was too important to go away from. There would be no church back home to receive them. This was the first church ever. And that meant you had 2,000 or 3,000 people not going home to their jobs, trying to live in Jerusalem together. Jerusalem was only a city of 30 to 35,000. There weren't 3,000 extra jobs in Jerusalem. So the church was in a tight situation. Things needed to be shared among people at that time and in that place. We see 24 other churches in other places in the New Testament, and all of them were generous. All of them gave to one another. Some of them gave an offering to support the church back in Jerusalem. Some of them supported Paul and Barnabas and other missionaries as they went off to new places, so that the people in the new places wouldn't have to support the ones who came to preach the gospel to them. But they didn't practice this complete socialism. Interesting enough, I've also heard that passage preached as in favor of capitalism. The theory being that here they did it, they practiced total socialism, and what do we see through the rest of the New Testament? They're gathering up an offering to give back to Jerusalem because the church back in Jerusalem is broke. So see, socialism doesn't work. I've heard it preached that way too. And again, both of those things are distractions from what's really going on. What's really going on is that the church gathered together, said to itself, what good can we share all among ourselves so that we are all together able to grow in the Lord and to become what we are supposed to be in Jesus Christ. This is an attitude that the church needs now more than any time in the last 100 years or so. Our church, the Christian church, in all our different denominations, is shrinking slowly and steadily here in the United States. And even faster than we're shrinking, we're losing the respect and the political influence that we once had. Even faster than our numbers are shrinking. And it used to be the case that our congregations were most of them big enough and vigorous enough to afford ministers for themselves and to have influence in their communities and to keep the city from allowing soccer games to be planned on Sunday mornings. In some places they were even able to pass laws so that stores and shops didn't open on Sunday morning. We don't have that kind of respect. We aren't that big a part of our culture anymore. So now, when our congregations are smaller and more separated from one another, because the culture around us is so much bigger, we need to take thought, not just for our own congregation, but for where we are in the midst of the church as a whole. We need to take thought for that. We have, right in front of us, a really good example of that. By right in front of us, I mean right here. Stomp on the ground. This building. The church here in Hillsborough was founded back in the early 1960s, and it was founded in the old-fashioned way. The Presbyterian got together, took out a map of central New Jersey, and put pens in it everywhere there was a Presbyterian church and said, look, there's a hole here, right about in Montgomery, Hillsborough. Let's start a church there. And they bought a piece of land before there was a single member of a church here. bought a piece of land, and then hired a pastor before there was a single member of the church, and the pastor went around, knocked on doors, and said, hey, we're starting a Presbyterian church. Are you looking for a Presbyterian church? And found enough people to get a congregation started. It was never a large congregation, but for 40 years or so, it was big enough to support its own pastor. But in the last 10 years, it's been gradually declining. So the congregation here at Hillsborough, when they reached the point where they couldn't afford to keep up this building anymore, said to themselves, wait a minute, let's not do the ordinary thing. The ordinary thing is just to shrink and die and let it be over. Or, at best, sell the building, put the money in the bank, use it to hire a pastor, and rent space to worship in until that money runs out. Those are the two most ordinary things that congregations do at a time like that. But Hillsborough said to themselves, wait a minute, what can we do for the whole church? Not just for our congregation. What can we do for the whole church? So they went looking for somebody who could use this building. We didn't even know they were looking. We weren't looking at this building. We were, finally, looking more seriously than we had at a possibility of moving or going somewhere else. We even talked about, can we spend money to remodel the New Brunswick building? We looked at, over the course of 2 years, 3 other properties. Only 2 of them did we take very seriously. 5 years before that, we looked at another property too. It had never worked out. We never talked to the people at Hillsborough. They came to us. They came to us because they were looking beyond their own walls and considering the good of the whole church and said, hey, would you like our building? We'll give it to you. We'll give it to you. The only thing we need back is that you host us for as long as we're still together as a congregation. That's all we need from you. You host us for as long as we're still together as a congregation, and we'll give you the building. So look now, not only did they do good for us, but also now they can afford the building because it doesn't cost them anything anymore. Now they can stay right here, which has always been their home for 50 years. Now, without the burden of the building, they can afford to keep their pastor. It's good for them as well as for us. This is the idea of the common good, that we look to create the conditions that will allow everyone to thrive. We look to create a situation to share the things that need to be shared so that everyone has a chance to do what they need, to get what they need, to become what they need. We still need to take a lesson from Hillsborough and use this idea of the common good, an idea we derive from the Scripture, to make the decisions we have to make in the next 2 or 3 years. Even as a congregation, we're pretty diverse. And there are lots of decisions to be made about building a new building, or a sanctuary, remodeling this one, or how to organize worship and other activities in the face of the fact that we're really a three-headed beast here. We're really a three-headed beast. And if we don't stop and ask, all right, what's the goodness that all of us share? What's the goodness that's common to the Taiwanese ministry, to TKC, to Helok, to Sky? What's the goodness that allows all of these groups to thrive? Not just to survive, to thrive. If we look for that good, even if we disagree about what it is or how we'll get it or what will make it work, if we're all at least looking for it together, if we are at unity in this, that we're committed to one another, we're committed to making it work together with and for one another, then we've got our best chance of making it work, of being people who do God's work, and of being people whom other people will want to join in worship, in ministry, and in mission.